I never expected my world to crumble on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Jessica and I had been married for nearly 7 years, a union that felt as solid as the oak tree in our backyard. She was my partner, my anchor, and the center of the small, peaceful world we had built together. But that morning, something changed. I got home early from a business trip, earlier than even I had anticipated. I'd landed the deal of a lifetime, a surprise bonus from a client that would fund the dream anniversary trip to the Bahamas I had been quietly planning for months. I envisioned Jessica's face lighting up when I handed her the tickets. That vision alone carried me through the sleepless red-eye flight. Pulling into the driveway, I noticed Jessica's car in its usual spot, but what immediately caught my attention was the sleek black sedan parked out front. It wasn't a car I recognized, and for the life of me, I couldn't figure out why it was there. Jessica rarely had visitors during the day, at least, not without telling me. Brushing it off as paranoia, I gathered my briefcase and the envelope holding our tickets, letting myself in as quietly as possible to preserve the element of surprise. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. It wasn't until I reached the base of the stairs that I heard it, a laugh. Her laugh. Jessica's laughter had always been infectious, a sound that could lift me from the darkest moods. But that morning, it felt like an arrow to the chest. I froze, straining to hear. The sound drifted down the stairwell, followed by a deeper, unfamiliar voice. Male. The weight of the moment pressed down on me. 100 explanations raced through my head, each more implausible than the last. A repairman? Her brother stopping by? I climbed the stairs with measured steps, my pulse drumming louder with every rise. The voices grew clearer, intimate in a way that made my skin crawl. Her soft, melodic laughter intertwined with his rumbling tones, each note stabbing deeper into the foundation of our life together. When I reached the top, the bedroom door was ajar. Through the narrow gap, I saw Jessica lying on the bed, her hair splayed over the pillow in that familiar messy wave I adored. She was propped up on one elbow, leaning toward him. A tall, broad-shouldered man I'd never seen before lounged beside her, shirtless, one hand casually resting on her bare hip. For a moment, the scene before me felt surreal, as if I were watching someone else's life unravel. Jessica laughed again, the kind of carefree laugh that had been absent from our marriage for months. I gripped the plane tickets tighter, the paper crumpling in my fist. They were meant to celebrate us, a way to rekindle what I thought we had lost to the grind of work and life. But now they felt like an insult, a cruel punchline to a joke I wasn't in on. I should have stormed in, demanded answers, and made them both face the consequences of their betrayal. But I didn't. I couldn't. My legs refused to move, as if rooted to the floor by the weight of my shock and disbelief. Instead, I turned and retreated down the stairs as quietly as I had come. Back in the kitchen, I collapsed into a chair at the table. My hands shook as I stared at the crumpled tickets, the dream of that anniversary trip now ash in my mouth. As the minutes crawled by, my initial shock gave way to a cold, simmering resolve. I wasn't going to confront Jessica in a fit of rage, giving her the chance to twist the narrative. No, I needed answers, proof, and I needed time to think. I spent the day playing the role of a dutiful husband. When Jessica came downstairs, freshly showered and glowing in that way she always did, I acted none the wiser. She kissed me on the cheek and asked about my trip, her voice as smooth as ever. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I might have believed everything was fine, but it wasn't. That night, while she slept soundly beside me, I began my work. I started with her phone, but it was locked with a passcode, a new development. Jessica had always been an open book, or so I thought. Undeterred, I moved to her laptop. There, I found a trail of breadcrumbs, emails, and encrypted chats with someone named Luke. They weren't explicit, but the tone and frequency of the exchanges spoke volumes. By the end of the week, I'd installed small cameras in the living room and bedroom, as well as a tracking app on her phone. I told myself it wasn't paranoia. It was about protecting what was left of my dignity and sanity. The cameras paid off sooner than I anticipated. The following Friday, while I was at work, Jessica came home early. So did Luke. I watched the footage that evening, alone in my office. The sight of them, comfortable in our home, laughing and touching like teenagers, made my stomach churn. It was more than just betrayal. It was a complete dismantling of the trust and love I had poured into our marriage. And then, something caught my eye. Jessica took a small box from her purse, a pair of tickets to a concert happening that weekend. I recognized the artist. It was one I had introduced her to when we first started dating. That was the final straw. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Jessica had shared a part of herself with this man that I thought was sacred to us. I decided to confront Jessica on her terms, ensuring I held all the cards. The next day, I told her I'd be working late. Instead, I drove to the concert venue and parked where I could see the entrance. Sure enough, Jessica and Luke arrived hand in hand, laughing as they passed through security. I didn't make a scene. Instead, I snapped pictures, evidence for the inevitable fallout. When I returned home that night, Jessica was already in bed, feigning sleep. I sat in the dark living room, the weight of the day pressing down on me like an anchor. The man I had been a week ago, the naive husband who thought a trip to the Bahamas could fix everything, was gone. In his place stood someone colder, harder, and determined to reclaim the life that had been stolen from him. The following weeks blurred together, each day a balancing act between pretending everything was normal and digging deeper into the web of lies Jessica had spun. She acted oblivious, carrying on with our routines, smiling at me over breakfast, asking about my work like nothing had changed. Her facade was maddeningly convincing, but mine was better. Beneath the surface, I was unraveling her life piece by piece. It started innocently enough. While combing through our shared accounts, I noticed small discrepancies, odd withdrawals and payments I didn't recognize. Jessica had always been responsible with money, so seeing $400 transferred here, $250 there, set off alarms. The recipient was labeled as JL Consulting, a name that meant nothing to me. At first, I thought it might be legitimate. Jessica occasionally hired professional organizers or decorators for her freelance interior design gigs. But this didn't add up. The transfers were regular, weekly even, and far too high for what I knew she needed. A quick online search revealed no business under the name JL Consulting. That's when I knew there was more to this than an affair. I needed access to her personal finances. The cameras in the house had already confirmed my suspicions. Jessica was using a second phone. She was careful, hiding it in the vent above our closet when she wasn't using it. She must have thought I never noticed the moments when she slipped away to text or take a quick call. One evening, while she was in the shower, I retrieved the phone. It was a cheap burner, but I was able to clone it with software I'd bought online. The process was seamless. Her messages, call logs, and emails were all mirrored onto a device I kept hidden in my office. What I found wasn't just evidence of her relationship with Luke. It was a window into her shadowy world. There were cryptic messages referencing accounts, transfers, and targets. Luke wasn't just some random fling. He was involved in something bigger with Jessica, something that smelled distinctly like financial fraud. Using what I learned from the cloned phone, I dove deeper. Jessica and Luke had set up a joint account at a local credit union under fake names, Laura Jones and David King. I nearly laughed at how unoriginal the aliases were. The transactions were damning. Large sums of money moved between the joint account and a series of offshore banks. Jessica had been siphoning funds out of our joint savings for months, funneling them into this secret account before sending it overseas. The realization hit me like a freight train. Her betrayal wasn't just personal, it was professional. She wasn't just breaking my heart, she was robbing me blind. With every piece of information I gathered, Luke became less of a shadow and more of a tangible threat. Using Jessica's burner phone, I found his last name, Hastings, and ran it through public records. What I discovered was chilling. Luke Hastings had a history of financial scams. He'd been implicated in several Ponzi schemes, though he'd never served time, likely because he was smart enough to let others take the fall. His most recent venture had collapsed 2 years ago, costing investors millions. He was currently employed as a consultant, which I now knew was code for laundering money. And now, Jessica was his latest partner. By this point, I realized I needed professional help. A private investigator, Thomas Wolfe, came highly recommended. Wolfe was ex-law enforcement, a grizzled veteran with a knack for uncovering buried secrets. After a long conversation in his dimly lit office, Wolf agreed to help. His first move was equipping me with advanced surveillance tools, miniature cameras, discrete audio recorders, and GPS trackers. Together, we set up a network of monitoring devices, ensuring Jessica's every move was documented. The next time Jessica and Luke met at a hotel, Wolf's team was there. They bugged their room, recording hours of conversation that confirmed what I had suspected. Jessica was deeply involved in Luke's schemes. They talked openly about offshore accounts, fake identities, and ways to avoid detection. "We need to move the money soon," Luke had said in one recording. "Too many eyes on this one. Laura," he used Jessica's alias, "make sure the transfers go through this weekend." Jessica's behavior began to shift. She became more secretive, more on edge. She started working late, leaving earlier in the mornings, and taking calls in hushed tones. If I asked where she was going, her answers were vague, but her lies were easy to track. With the GPS tracker hidden in her car, I followed her movements. She wasn't going to work like she claimed. She was meeting Luke at a co-working space downtown. From there, they'd often drive together to a high-rise apartment I hadn't known about. The apartment was their base of operations, a safe house where they conducted business. Through the cameras Wolf installed, I watched as they huddled over laptops, whispering about numbers and plans. It was infuriating, but I held my rage in check. The deeper I dug, the more tangled the web became. Luke wasn't the only person Jessica was working with. A series of emails referenced another player, a woman named Clara. Clara seemed to be the mastermind, giving orders and managing the logistics of their operation. Jessica's emails to Clara were deferential, almost desperate, as though she was afraid of disappointing her. "The last transfer is complete," one message read. "Luke and I are ready for the next step. Let me know how to proceed." Who was Clara? And how deep did this conspiracy run? Despite all the evidence, there was one thing I couldn't figure out. Why? Why would Jessica risk everything? Our marriage, her reputation, her freedom, for a con artist like Luke? I found the answer buried in her emails. An old message from Clara stood out. "Remember why you're doing this. Luke saved you when no one else would. You owe him everything." Saved her? From what? Digging into Jessica's past, I uncovered a part of her life she'd never shared. Before we met, she had been drowning in debt, a failed business venture, mounting credit card bills, and a predatory loan that threatened to ruin her. Luke had stepped in, offering her a way out. He'd paid off her debts, but it hadn't been an act of kindness. It was a loan with strings attached. Jessica was trapped, bound to him by a debt she could never fully repay. I didn't know how much longer I could keep up the charade. Every night, as Jessica smiled at me across the dinner table, I felt the weight of the truth pressing down on me. She thought she was in control, but I was the one holding all the cards now. The time for revenge was coming. I just needed her to make one final mistake. The weight of my discoveries sat heavy on my chest, yet I knew I couldn't let it crush me. Every piece of evidence I gathered was a puzzle piece, and I was assembling a picture of Jessica's betrayal so vivid it was almost blinding. The more I learned, the more I understood that this wasn't just about her infidelity. It was about survival. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was using me. Our marriage, our house, even our savings, they were pawns in a larger game. And Luke? He was just a means to an end. The Jessica I thought I knew had never existed. I began laying the groundwork for my revenge in secret. Every morning, after Jessica left the house, I retreated to my office, a room she rarely entered, and mapped out my strategy. Wolf, my private investigator, helped refine my ideas. "If you want to make this stick," he told me one afternoon, "you need to be meticulous. You can't just blow up her life. You need to dismantle it piece by piece, so she can't recover." I started with the financial angle. Her secret account with Luke was already under scrutiny, but I wanted more. I worked late into the night, combing through Jessica's emails and documents until I found the trail that led to Clara. Wolf identified her as Clara Ellis, a financial mastermind who had been linked to several international scams but had never been caught. Clara was Jessica's mentor, her puppet master. And then, I found the file. It was buried deep in Jessica's laptop, hidden under layers of encryption. When I finally cracked it, the contents left me breathless. It wasn't just their operations, it was their plan for me. They had been draining our joint accounts to fund their scheme, but they had something bigger in mind: selling our house. My house. Jessica had forged my signature on documents, setting up a transfer of ownership to a shell company controlled by Clara. Once the sale was complete, I would have been left with nothing. No home, no savings, no Jessica. Not that I wanted her anymore. It wasn't enough to ruin their plans. I wanted them to feel what I had felt: the betrayal, the humiliation, the anger. But I had to be careful. If I acted too soon, I risked tipping them off. If I waited too long, I risked losing everything. So, I turned their own tools against them. I cloned Jessica's burner phone a second time, this time installing spyware that allowed me to track her in real time. Every text she sent, every call she made, every location she visited. It was all logged and sent directly to me. I also reached out to a lawyer, discreetly preparing for the inevitable divorce. I needed to ensure that when this all came crashing down, I would walk away with everything Jessica had tried to steal. The lawyer was sharp and relentless, immediately advising me to freeze our joint accounts and secure my assets. The first twist came when I followed Jessica one afternoon. She told me she was going to a client meeting, but the GPS tracker in her car told a different story. She drove to a suburban neighborhood, parking outside a modest house. I watched from a distance as she knocked on the door and was greeted by a middle-aged man with graying hair. At first, I thought he might be another lover, but their interaction was different. Jessica wasn't affectionate, she was nervous. She handed him a manila envelope, which he opened briefly before nodding and inviting her inside. I stayed in my car, camera ready, and waited. When she left an hour later, her face was pale, her steps hurried. Wolf ran the man's license plate and discovered he was a private investigator, one Jessica had hired. The revelation was a gut punch. She wasn't just betraying me, she was watching me. I adjusted my strategy accordingly. I made a point of being unpredictable, leaving work early some days and staying late on others. I started taking cash out of ATMs instead of using my credit cards, knowing she was likely monitoring my spending. And I stopped keeping notes on my plans, committing everything to memory instead. The second twist came 2 weeks later. Wolf called me late at night, his voice urgent. "We've got a problem," he said. He sent me a video clip captured from one of the cameras we'd installed in the apartment Jessica and Luke were using. In the footage, Luke was talking to Clara, his tone agitated. "I don't trust her," he said. "She's getting sloppy. If she screws this up, it's on you." Clara didn't respond immediately, but when she did, her words were chilling. "If Jessica becomes a liability, we cut her loose. You know what that means." It was clear Jessica had no idea she was expendable. Clara and Luke weren't partners. They were predators, and Jessica was their prey. Knowing this changed everything. My revenge wasn't just about me anymore. It was about ensuring Jessica faced the consequences of her actions while protecting her from becoming another one of their victims. I began leaking information anonymously. I sent the financial records I had uncovered to the IRS, ensuring that their accounts would come under scrutiny. I forwarded copies of their emails and messages to Wolf, who passed them along to contacts in law enforcement. But I didn't stop there. I wanted Clara and Luke to turn on each other. Using Jessica's cloned phone, I sent messages from her account, sowing seeds of doubt. To Luke, I hinted that Clara was planning to cut him out of the operation. To Clara, I suggested that Luke was skimming money off the top. The final piece of my plan was the house. Jessica had set up the transfer, but the sale hadn't gone through yet. I worked with my lawyer to block the transaction and file a claim of forgery against Jessica. If she tried to push the sale through, she'd face criminal charges. The tension in the house was palpable. Jessica was on edge, her lies beginning to unravel. She started asking questions, testing me to see if I knew anything. "Is everything okay at work?" she asked one evening, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. "Busy," I replied, keeping my expression neutral. "Why do you ask?" She hesitated, then forced a smile. "No reason. You just seem distracted." If only she knew. The final twist came when I discovered Jessica had booked a one-way flight to a country without an extradition treaty. The departure date was less than a week away. She was planning to run. and I was planning to let her think she could. The morning of her flight, Jessica was unusually cheerful. She hummed a tune while pouring her coffee, her usual guarded expression replaced with something close to relief. It was the face of someone who thought they'd won. "Big day today?" I asked, my tone light. "Not really," she replied with a smile, glancing at her phone. "Just a few errands." I nodded, feigning disinterest. She was a skilled liar, but she didn't know she was outmatched. Every step she had taken in the past week, every dollar she had funneled, every bag she had packed, every message she had sent, I knew. As she left for her errands, I let the silence settle around the house. It wasn't long before my phone buzzed. Wolf had sent me the signal. Jessica was en route to meet Luke and Clara at their apartment for what would likely be their final debrief before she disappeared. The trap was already in place. Weeks of preparation had led to this moment, every detail meticulously planned. Through the documents I had leaked, the IRS and the FBI were now well aware of Clara's operation. Agents were standing by, ready to act on my signal. But the most important part of the plan wasn't law enforcement. It was the illusion I had created for Jessica, Luke, and Clara. They thought they had orchestrated their escape flawlessly. They didn't realize they were running straight into a trap. I arrived at the apartment minutes after Jessica did, parking a block away. Wolf was in position nearby, watching through a discreet camera we had installed days earlier. "They're all inside," Wolf said through my earpiece. "Your move." When I knocked on the apartment door, there was a brief pause. Jessica opened it, her face draining of color when she saw me. "Matt," she stammered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Surprised to see me?" I asked, stepping inside before she could stop me. The room was sparsely furnished, a makeshift headquarters for their scheme. Luke and Clara were seated at a table littered with laptops and papers. Clara looked up first, her sharp eyes narrowing. Luke stood, his posture tense. "What the hell is this?" Luke demanded, his voice tight. I didn't answer him. Instead, I turned to Jessica. "You weren't even going to say goodbye?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came. "Who is this?" Clara's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Let me introduce myself," I said, turning to face her. "I'm the guy whose life you've been siphoning away for months. The guy whose wife you turned into a criminal." Clara raised an eyebrow, unruffled. "You've got a lot of nerve walking in here. And you've got a lot of nerve thinking you could pull this off without consequences." I shot back, my voice cold. Luke took a step forward, his frame towering over me. "You need to leave." I smirked, my confidence rattling him. "I don't think so, Luke. See, you're not as clever as you think. I've been watching you. All of you." I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen, projecting a live feed onto one of their laptops. It showed a convoy of unmarked SUVs pulling up outside the building. Clara's calm facade cracked for the first time. "What did you do?" she hissed. "I made sure you get exactly what you deserve," I said, my voice low. "Every account, every transfer, every shady deal. It's all documented. The feds have it. Right now, they're coming up to meet you." Luke's bravado evaporated, replaced by panic. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice wavered. I turned to Jessica, who stood frozen, her face pale. "You could have walked away," I told her. "You could have come clean. But instead, you chose this." The pounding on the door came seconds later. "FBI, open up." Clara shot me a glare that could have cut steel, but she knew the game was over. She darted for the window, but Wolf's team had thought of that. Two agents were already outside, blocking her escape. Luke lunged for a laptop, trying to wipe the evidence, but I stopped him. "Don't bother. It's all backed up," I said, satisfaction curling my lips. The door burst open, agents flooding the room. Clara didn't resist, but Luke put up a fight, shouting obscenities as they dragged him to the floor. Jessica stood in the center of the chaos, tears streaming down her face. "Matt, please," she whispered. I turned to her, my expression devoid of sympathy. "I gave you everything," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and sadness. "And you threw it all away for this?" The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Clara and Luke were charged with fraud, money laundering, and a litany of other crimes. Jessica, while not the mastermind, wasn't spared. She faced charges of conspiracy and forgery, her involvement too deep to deny. My lawyer insured the house, and the remaining assets were secured in my name. I filed for divorce the same day Jessica was arraigned. Months later, I received a letter from Jessica. She wrote from prison, pleading for forgiveness, claiming she had been manipulated by Clara and Luke. She begged for another chance, promising she had changed. I read the letter twice, then tossed it into the fire. Forgiveness wasn't on the table. Not for her. I wasn't the same man I had been before all this. Jessica's betrayal had shattered me, but in the process, I had rebuilt myself into someone stronger, someone who wouldn't be taken advantage of again. As I stood by the fire, watching the ashes of her words swirl upward, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. The storm had passed, and I had survived. And that's how it ended. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts below. Tell us, what would you have done in their shoes?